Welcome to the Cardinal, News of Virginia, presented by Cardinal News. We are a nonprofit independent news source covering Southwest and Southside Virginia. We're at cardinalnews.org. I'm Dutchie Jessee, and today I am joined by Lisa Rowan, our education reporter. And before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, 5 Points Creative, a full-service award-winning marketing firm serving clients all over the U.S. from their headquarters in Roanoke, Virginia. Thank you, 5 Points Creative. And hello, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi, Dutchie.
Yes, it's wonderful to have you. This weekly podcast looks at a different topic every week, and we're going to be talking with Cardinal News reporters about these things that you're covering out in the field. You kind of become experts at each topic because there's a lot of involvement, a lot of time that goes into reporting on some of these issues. So today we are going to be talking about cell phone policies in Virginia's public schools. As I mentioned, Lisa Rowan is the education reporter for Cardinal News. And Lisa, give me a quick thumbnail on where we are. Why are we even talking about this right now?
We're talking about this right now because school divisions across our region and across the state are in the process of implementing cell phone free plans for their schools. This is at the request of the governor, who last summer asked the Department of Education to put policies into place, a recommended policy for school divisions to help students put their phones away during the school day. And this was particularly an issue with high school students and the older students who are so used to being on their devices. But there are concerns that academic achievement is sort of flagging because there's a lot of cell phone use, and that there are discipline issues because students are distracted right now by their cell phones. So this is all an effort to get kids to put down their phones and to spend a little more attention on their schoolwork.
So some of the people listening right now, maybe of a certain age, where cell phones weren't even invented when we were in school.
Yeah.
It was not a thing. So talk to me a little bit. How long has this been an issue, or when has it started to sort of heat up in terms of, hey, we need some kind of policy on this now in school?
Yeah, and I am of the generation where if you had a cell phone in school, in high school, it had to be off and away all the time. These were not smartphones. These were very dumb phones in my time. And so the early rules were just, if you have a cell phone, just like keep it away. It has to be off. You shouldn't even have it in school. But as smartphones have become more ubiquitous, it has been harder for schools to control the use of the smartphones. First of all, most kids have them or something that works like a smartphone. And you saw as the rise of iPhones and Samsung phones and these different smartphones, as they became more ubiquitous, schools were finding ways to use these cell phones in ways that contributed to academic achievement. They were doing like learning games on their phones, or doing like quizzes or class activities with phones. And so there were no consistent rules from school to school, from school division to school division. And as we have allowed phone use in schools in whatever way a school decided was appropriate, it is really hard to pull that back, especially after the pandemic. During the pandemic, we all got so used to getting what we needed to do done with any device available. And so now the state is taking a concerted look to say, okay, we've sort of opened Pandora's box, like too far. Can we roll it back in?
Yeah, I started to say, as a parent, I had a plan for when my daughter, who is now 19, was going to get her first cell phone. And I ended up having to get one a little earlier than I planned in middle school because they were actually being utilized in school. And it wasn't like they were making us, but I was like, well, she if she wants to participate in these things that the teacher was leading. So, which really surprised me at the time. Now, this has been a while. But so when you talk about that, about how they were kind of being utilized for curriculum, or at least extra things in class, some parents may have felt pressured, like, oh, I might need to start this sooner than we thought. Let's now talk about Executive Order number 33, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
So set the stage for me here. Governor Youngkin signed an executive order in July of 2023, and what was the order?
So he directed the Department of Education to put together guidelines for cell phone free education. He did not specify what that meant. He said to the department, figure it out, figure out a plan, listen to the people of the Commonwealth, and figure out what works best. But his specification was we need to reduce or curtail cell phone use by students during the school day. He cited, test scores have sort of lagged since smartphones have become so commonplace. He also cited that there's been increased anxiety among young people and an increase in awareness of mental health issues among young people. And while the evidence that smartphones are the reason for such anxiety, we could talk about that. That could be a whole nother episode. But, the point is basically, here is a place at school where we could have 8 hours where the students are not on their cell phones. There are plenty of other ways that they're connected. They use Chromebooks or other forms of technology during school. But let's have some control over this. Let's have them put down their phones and talk to one another or talk to their teacher. So he directed the Department of Education to put together guidelines. The department did listening sessions around the state over the summer and released draft guidelines and then final guidelines. And the final guidelines say that that there should be no phones during the school day used by any student at any level, elementary, middle, high school. This is a bell-to-bell rule, so from the first bell in the morning to the final bell at the end of the school day. If you are an older student, you can use your phone before or after school. Say if you're doing a sport or an extracurricular, you can have your phone then. But, if it's instructional time, if we're in class, even if we're at lunchtime, no phones. And that is a little bit of a change because in a lot of places, they've allowed the high schoolers to use their phones between classes and at lunch. So this is where, there have been policies that have varied greatly among school divisions around the state. But this is really the most, I don't want to say severe, but the most restrictive policy that we've seen across the board. So school divisions are supposed to put into place policies by January 1 that are adhering to this minimum standard of restriction.
So before we talk about how some divisions are responding and choosing to go about implementing this, I want to know, you went to one of the listening sessions over the summer, one in Roanoke. What did the state hear from parents? Did you hear anything that surprised you? And I also want to know what they heard from teachers.
It was really interesting. So there were about 50 people at the session that I went to, and Lisa Coons, who's the superintendent of instruction for the state, she was leading these. And it was really an open discussion, asking people, what does cell phone free education mean to you? And there was a lot of agreement that if a student is in class, being instructed by a teacher, that's a place where everyone pretty much agrees that students shouldn't be using their cell phones. They should be paying attention to the teacher. But you get a lot of disagreement when you start to talk about all those other parts of the school day, like in the hallways or during lunch. A lot of parents brought up, I want to be able to conveniently reach my child, to give them an update about who's going to pick them up or what the plan is after school. We've gotten used to that near constant communication with family members. And so a lot of parents bristled at the idea of having to go through maybe the front office to get a message to their student if there's a change in plans. A lot of parents also brought up, the issue of parents' rights. The parent has a right to give this device to their child, and they think that they should be the ones that are creating the rules, not the school. But then on the flip side of things, you also have issues of safety. And honestly, there are pros and cons related to safety, sort of on both sides of this. It's really complex, and I'll give you this example. There were a lot of parents who were saying, I don't feel secure, I don't feel safe if I don't know I can get in touch with my child. And then you had a teacher who I believe was in Franklin County, and she was an elementary school teacher, and there was a fire at the school that she taught at. And every school has an emergency plan in place. We all do fire drills when we're in school. We all now do emergency lockdown drills when we're in school. And there was this fire, the students evacuated with their teachers, and then chaos broke out because there were students contacting their parents, the parents contacting students, parents coming to pick up their students when the protocol for that hadn't been arranged yet. And so it was just chaos because everything that was in the plan and in the practice went out the window at that point. So she was making the point that teachers and professionals in schools can do their jobs better when they are trusted to follow the protocol that's in place. So there were a lot of different opinions and situations that came up during that meeting, and it's very clear that everyone cares for the health and safety and the academic achievement of the children. It's a matter of how we do it. That there was a lot of really good discussion at that session.
You mentioned safety, and I'm wondering if anyone specifically brought up, besides fire drills and things like that, the potential for active shooter situations. Did anyone say those words out loud?
Oh, yes. That was brought up in that session, and it's something that has come up in the questionnaire that the state had available throughout the summer. So there was a website where anyone could go and submit their comments about how they felt about what cell phone free education looked like, or what they thought of the policy that was proposed. And this window was open for comments over the start of the school year. And in very early September, there was a school shooting in Georgia. And so I had submitted a FOIA request so I could see all of the comments that had been submitted.
A Freedom of Information Act request.
Exactly, yes. And several people wrote in right after that event, and they were like, look at what happened in Georgia. You can't take this phone away from my child. I need to know that they're okay. I need to know that they can contact emergency professionals if the worst case scenario happens. And I think if we didn't live in a country where there have been more than 50 school shootings in 2024 at K-12 schools alone, that's not even counting the colleges. I think if that wasn't such an everyday occurrence, I think it would be a little bit of a different conversation. But I think this is also a very clear and very understandable fear for parents.
It's hard to overstate the emotional side of that particular issue. The school shooting that took place at a Christian school in Wisconsin in December, the initial reports, or some reports that trickled out the next day, were that a second grader called police on a cell phone. It's going to be hard to have a conversation outside of that once you hear that, because you said it does feel like an everyday occurrence, unfortunately. Even though it's not literally every day, it can feel like that. So it'll be interesting to see as this new bell-to-bell policy basically is supposed to be implemented, as we get into 2025 and then future, and how future school divisions are going to handle this. So I do want to talk about the logistics. So how do you take it? Do you take it away? How are we proposing to handle this?
Right, especially if you've ever talked to a high school student and tried to take them away from their phone.
Right.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
So how are you going to do this when you have thousands of high school students, right? So school divisions are doing a lot of different things to adhere to this policy. Some of them are just saying, turn the phone off. You can have it in your bag, but don't have it in your pocket. Don't have it out. And that may be almost a happy medium with those people who are worried about safety. If the phone is still in their backpack, if the worst case scenario happens, they can probably still get to it, right? So in a lot of cases, school divisions are just going to say, keep it away. If we see it out, there's going to be consequences discipline-wise, right? Some schools are taking this a step further, and they're having students put their phones into pouches that lock magnetically at the beginning of the day, and they can access them again at the end of the day. It's almost like going to a comedy show and being told to put your phone away, except it's in school.
Right.
Because a lot of the pouches are called Yonder pouches.
Yeah,
and
they were devised for gigs, right?
Yes, the only place I've ever used one is at a comedy show where they don't want clips leaking out onto the internet because a comedian's testing out a new bit. So I think of comedy every time I think of Yonder pouches. But these pouches, they cost $30 a piece. And so it's not a small expenditure, but some school divisions are saying this is a way that we can control access to phones, and we can ensure that students aren't finding ways to use their phones during the day.
Is the pouch then given to the student and they just can't get into it?
Yes, the student has the pouch with their phone in it during the day, sort of in their backpack or whatever, but they can't get into it unless they have access to this magnetic little receptacle where they can tap the pouch to unlock it.
Yeah.
So the places that have implemented or are beginning to implement Yonder pouches, they have methods where in an emergency you can get into one of these cases. For instance, I believe in a lot of places teachers have a way so that they could easily tap and unlock a pouch if needed. But But in most cases, it's you tap your pouch at the beginning of the day to lock it, and then you tap it on your way out of the building at the end of the day, and there are no questions about it.
Are there school systems in Virginia who are either already trying this or say they're going to try the pouches?
It started in Danville for this school year, and Danville started implementing it for all of their high school students. So it is early days there to see how it is going. But another school division that is doing it starting in January is Bedford County. And so they right away were like, all right, we ordered these Yonder pouches. This is what we're going to do. And this is the policy. There's no opt out. You sort of have to just, go with the plan, and they're going to make it the new normal.
How are they paying for the pouches?
For Bedford County specifically, there is a grant that they were able to access to pay for this. It's not coming out of sort of operational school funding. The question is going to be, how will a division pay for this? If they have grant funding now, will they have grant funding in the future for replacements or for repairs? If a pouch rips, they need new ones. Students will have a little bit of responsibility for this if they have a pouch that's in disrepair because of their own doing. Again, I go back to high schoolers, not always the most reliable people. So, for Bedford County, they have grant money, but it's going to depend, place to place, how they want to pay for anything that they want to implement that's like that. The Department of Education is making some micro grants available to school divisions. They could be used, towards pouches, I believe, if they wanted to, but it also could be used towards education, posters, information sessions for families, that sort of thing, sort of general education around cell phone use and healthy cell phone use. So it's, even though we have this sort of guidance from the state that has come down and sort of has this like umbrella of, okay, this is what we're doing, how school divisions are doing it is sort of left up to them.
So what other school divisions in Cardinal country, which is Southwest and Southside Virginia, what are you hearing from divisions about how they're responding to the governor's bell-to-bell policy, if you will, and are they planning on implementing it ASAP, or how's that working?
Yeah, so some divisions already had a policy similar to this in place, so they might not be making a change, and it may just be business as usual. Some places are strengthening their cell phone policies to make it that bell-to-bell policy, and they're just saying, have your phones off and away all day, and this is what we're going to do. Lynchburg and Pennsylvania recently put through policies that match that. Not every school division is making a change right away. And I will say, it does not appear that anyone's going to get in trouble for not doing this right on January 1st. It's sort of if a good faith effort is seen, then everything is going to be fine. But a couple of examples of this are Bristol has held off on changing its policy at the end of 2024 because they have 2 new school board members coming on in January, and they want those school board members to be a part of finalizing the policy. So that's sort of a procedural delay. But you also have the example of Roanoke City. They're holding off until the beginning of the 25-26 school year. Their reason is because they implemented a new policy at the start of this school year, and that was before the final policy was announced. And the current policy, as of this year, says that elementary and middle school students can't use their phones all day. High schoolers can use their phones outside of academic periods, such as between classes or at lunch. So they're going to update the policy at the start of the 2025 school year because the school board talked about in their December meeting that they already made a big change and it took some adjusting to get used to that. And they don't want to change it again and have a change mid-year. So they're going to just make another adjustment for the next beginning of the school year.
What about the legality of this? So like, can you say you have to put it away or even put it in pouches? Does anyone question the legality of this whole thing?
I don't think it's a question of... Hear me out on this. I don't think it's a question of legality as much as it's a question of enforcement, right? So the governor can ask for this to be done. The Department of Education can say, you need to adhere to these new policies, or something that's at least as strong as the recommendation we put out. They can't really... And there's no way to enforce this, right? They basically asked nicely. There is no law in place with a consequence for not having a cell phone policy that's this strong. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the aspect of what to do on a school-by-school level to resistance to this. For example, I've heard some chatter in Bedford County that there are parents who are saying, my child is not going to use this yonder pouch. And so they are planning to not comply. I don't know how that's going to work out in January when the students come back, but we have yet to see how schools handle any resistance to this, where a parent says, I'm not complying, my child is not complying, they will have access to their phones. There are also a lot of students who still will have access to their phones. This isn't a case if a student has an IEP or a 504. These are medical or educational plans that warrant them having an electronic device. I think the best example of this might be if a student has diabetes and they use an app for their monitoring for their levels. So you're going to have some exceptions to the rule, and how a school sort of maintains order when there are some exceptions. That's going to be interesting to see in January as well. So a school absolutely has a right to say, you need to adhere to our electronics use policy. And a lot of schools already had such policies in place. It's a matter of when you have this big of a change to a population of young people and also young parents in a lot of cases who are so used to cell phones being a part of our day-to-day lives, how it's going to go in January when these policies start to go into place.
What do you know about other states? Or do they already have policies? Where is Virginia on all this?
Well, Dutchie, if you see the video version of this, I'm flipping to the page where I just took notes on this.
It's all good.
We have notes. So there are 8 states that have statewide policies restricting cell phone use in schools. This varies state to state, but there's some sort of statewide policy. South Carolina and Virginia are among them. And South Carolina and Virginia, it basically went through the governor. The governor was like, we need to make a change. There are a couple of other states that have had bills go through their state governments to create a law. So you have 2 variations there. 10 states have education departments that have issued policy recommendations to limit cell phone use. West Virginia is our nearest neighbor who has that. And there are 11 states that have introduced statewide legislation to ban or restrict cell phone use in schools. Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina are on that list, but legislation has been introduced but not yet implemented or finalized. So you have half of states, at least, that either have a cell phone restriction policy or are on the way there. So Virginia is not alone in this regard at all. And I think the overall sentiment there is we may not be entirely sure the impact on young people's brains and emotional health from using smartphones and social media, but we should probably have them use these phones less in school. That's the sort of the through line here.
Yeah. I should clarify for anyone who's noticed any dated references. We're recording this in late December. You'll start to be able to hear it. January is when you'll hear this. We would be interested in hearing from any parents, students, or teachers who would like to tell them how it's going. If you're in a school division that's trying to implement some form of this ban or not, what does your student think about it? What do you think about it? Lisa, what's your email address?
My email is lisa@cardinalnews.org. So feel free to write in. I would love to hear how it's going where you live.
All right. Well, Lisa Rowan is the education reporter for Cardinal News. This is the Cardinal News of Virginia, our weekly podcast. Thank you for listening, and we want to thank our sponsor, 5 Points Creative, a full-service, award-winning marketing firm serving clients all over the U.S. from their headquarters in Roanoke, Virginia. With Lisa Rowan and everyone at Cardinal News, I'm Dutchie Jessee.